The rancher gave his last horse to two Apache sisters. At dawn, their father came with 200 warriors. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. Imagine a vast, barren land where the sun beats down relentlessly. A land that holds secrets, mysteries, and stories of survival. In the heart of this unforgiving desert, a rancher lives alone, isolated from the world. His name is Thomas, and he's been tending to his cattle for years, living a simple, quiet life. He was once part of a bustling community, but now, he's a man of solitude, only his animals and his thoughts to keep him company. One day, as he's out riding through the open plains, he notices two figures on horseback approaching from the distance. At first, they seem like just another pair of travelers, but as they draw nearer, Thomas realizes something is different. These aren't ordinary travelers. The women are dressed in the traditional attire of the Apache tribe, their faces stern yet filled with exhaustion. Their horses are worn down, clearly struggling from days of travel. As they come to a halt, one of the women, a younger girl, seems to be in pain. She's holding her side, and Thomas can see blood seeping through her clothes. Without hesitation, he dismounts, his instincts taking over. He approaches them cautiously, but with a sense of urgency. The older woman, who seems to be in charge, looks at him with a mixture of gratitude and caution. She speaks in a language Thomas doesn't understand, but her body language is clear. She's asking for help. Thomas, though not a man of many words, understands the importance of a simple act of kindness. He knows he can't turn his back on these women, no matter who they are or where they come from. After assessing the situation, Thomas offers them his last horse. It's the only horse he has left, the one he'd been saving for himself, but he knows it's the right thing to do. The women thank him with a nod, their eyes filled with silent gratitude. They tell him they have to continue on their journey, but before they leave, the older woman whispers something in his ear. "We will repay you," she says, before turning and riding off into the horizon. The rancher watches them disappear, his mind racing with questions. Who are they? Why were they in such a dire state? And what did the older woman mean by repayment? Thomas shakes his head, trying to push the thoughts aside. But little does he know, the simple act of kindness he's just shown will set off a chain of events that will change his life forever. As the sun sets on the horizon, Thomas returns to his ranch, unaware that a storm is about to brew, one that will bring a reckoning he could never have imagined. What will happen next? Stay tuned as the story unfolds. As the days passed, the quiet rancher, Thomas, went about his usual routines, never imagining that the events of the previous day would lead him into the whirlwind that was about to come. The sun rose higher and higher in the sky, painting the landscape with its relentless heat, but Thomas couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in his chest since helping the Apache women. He kept wondering if they were truly gone, or if he would see them again. It wasn't like him to dwell on such things, but there was something different about those two women. They had left a lasting impression on him, even though he knew very little about them. One evening, just before sunset, as Thomas was fixing a fence near the edge of his property, he heard the unmistakable sound of galloping horses. His heart skipped a beat. At first, he thought it might be someone passing through, but as the sound grew louder, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was too late in the day for any travelers to be out, and too dangerous for anyone to be galloping so recklessly through the open plains. He grabbed his rifle, his instincts kicking in, ready to face whatever was coming his way. As the riders emerged from the dust, Thomas's eyes widened in surprise. It was them, the two Apache women. But they were not alone this time. Behind them, riding in perfect formation, was a large group of Apache warriors. Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. He knew these people, or at least he thought he did. The older woman, the one who had spoken to him the day before, rode at the front of the group, her expression serious but calm. She seemed to be leading the warriors, her presence commanding the respect of everyone behind her. As the group came to a halt, the woman dismounted gracefully and approached Thomas. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. She spoke to him in her native language, but Thomas didn't need to understand the words. Her gaze alone told him everything he needed to know. "We have come to thank you," she said in English, her voice steady and firm. "You have done something that most would never have done. You saved our lives, and we cannot forget that." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had no idea what to expect from this moment, but he wasn't prepared for the flood of emotions that hit him all at once. This was no ordinary thank you. The older woman stepped aside, revealing a man who had just dismounted from one of the horses. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that immediately caught Thomas off guard. He had the look of someone who had spent his life in battle, someone who commanded respect. The man approached Thomas slowly, his steps measured and deliberate. As he came closer, Thomas could feel the weight of his gaze, as if the man was sizing him up. The older woman turned to Thomas and spoke once more. "This is my father, the leader of our tribe," she said, her voice filled with respect. "He has come to offer you a gift, something that you have earned through your kindness." Thomas's heart raced. A gift? What could they possibly offer him? He had done nothing more than what anyone with a sense of decency would have done. But the man's eyes remained fixed on him, unwavering. "We do not forget those who show us kindness," the tribal leader said, his voice deep and commanding. "Your actions have saved the lives of my daughters, and for that, you will be honored." Thomas was still in shock, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling inside him. He had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to something so grand. But what came next would change everything. The tribal leader raised his hand, signaling to his warriors. They all dismounted in unison, and as they did, Thomas realized that something far larger than just a thank you was unfolding before him. "We offer you our protection," the tribal leader continued. "You are now one of us, and no harm will come to you as long as you live." Thomas looked around at the warriors, each one standing tall and proud. He had never felt more out of place, but at the same time, a strange sense of belonging settled over him. Little did he know that this moment would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would bring both great challenges and great rewards. As the warriors began to set up camp near his ranch, Thomas realized that his life would never be the same again. The storm that had begun with a simple act of kindness was only just beginning to unfold. As the days passed, Thomas continued to adjust to his new reality. The Apache warriors remained camped near his ranch, their presence both unsettling and strangely comforting. He spent most of his time helping them with supplies and learning about their ways, but a part of him still struggled to fully understand the magnitude of the offer the tribal leader had given him. He had been given more than just protection. He had been welcomed into their tribe. The rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, but he wasn't sure what. One morning, just as the sun began to rise, Thomas was outside tending to his cattle when he saw something that made his heart race. A small group of Apache warriors approached, but this time, they weren't riding horses. They were walking, and they were carrying something large and heavy between them. As they came closer, Thomas saw that it was a massive bundle wrapped in furs and cloth. His heart skipped a beat. What could they possibly be carrying? He stood frozen for a moment, watching them approach. The leader of the warriors, the man who had spoken to him so many times before, stepped forward. "You are needed," he said, his voice solemn and direct. "We must speak to the tribal leader. He has something important to discuss with you." Thomas's stomach twisted. He had no idea what was happening, but the seriousness of the situation was clear. He followed the warriors as they made their way toward the camp where the tribal leader was waiting. When they arrived, the tribal leader was sitting by a fire, surrounded by his closest advisors. The air was thick with tension, and Thomas could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he approached. "What is it?" Thomas asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The tribal leader motioned for him to sit. "There is something that must be done," he said quietly. "The tribe is in danger, and you are the only one who can help us." Thomas blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to make sense of the situation. The tribal leader looked at him with a mixture of respect and determination. "There is a rival tribe that has been encroaching on our land," he explained. "They've taken what is ours, and we cannot let them continue. We need someone who can lead us into battle, someone who understands the land and the ways of the white man." Thomas's heart raced. He wasn't a warrior. He was just a rancher. But the tribal leader's words echoed in his mind. You've already proven your strength and your heart, the tribal leader continued. Now you must prove your loyalty to us. We need you to lead us into battle and reclaim what is ours. Thomas was silent for a long time, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had never fought a battle in his life, but he couldn't ignore the sense of responsibility that was growing inside him. He had been given so much, and now, it was time to repay that kindness. I'll do it, he said, his voice firm. I'll lead your people. The tribal leader nodded, a look of pride in his eyes. You will not be alone, he said. We will fight together. Over the next few days, Thomas prepared for the battle ahead. The warriors trained, honing their skills with bows and arrows, while Thomas familiarized himself with the terrain and the strategies he would need to employ. As the day of the battle drew near, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He had never faced such a challenge, but he knew that this was his chance to prove himself, not just to the Apache people, but to himself as well. The night before the battle, the sky was filled with stars, and Thomas sat alone outside his cabin, staring into the vast emptiness. He had never been a man of violence, but the stakes were high, and the Apache tribe was depending on him. He thought about the kindness he had shown those two Apache sisters and the debt they had promised to repay. Now, it seemed that the time had come to fulfill that promise. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, the Apache warriors gathered at the edge of the ranch, ready for battle. Thomas stood at the front, his heart pounding in his chest, as the tribal leader gave the signal. The warriors mounted their horses and charged forward, and Thomas followed, leading them into the unknown. It was a moment of reckoning, and as the sound of hooves echoed through the valley, Thomas knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The battle had begun, and his fate was now tied to the tribe's survival. The sound of hooves pounding the earth echoed through the valley as Thomas and the Apache warriors charged forward, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow across the landscape, but the air was thick with tension. Thomas had never felt such a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just about saving the tribe anymore. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of leading them to victory. As they neared the enemy encampment, the warriors fell into formation, their faces steely with resolve. Thomas, though unaccustomed to battle, rode at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the rival tribe. His mind raced with the lessons he had learned in the past few days: how to command, how to fight. But there was one thing he couldn't shake: the overwhelming feeling of being out of place. He had always been a rancher, a man who worked the land, not a leader of warriors. Yet here he was, about to lead them into battle. As they closed in on the enemy, the tribal leader, his father's face filled with authority and pride, looked to Thomas and gave him a silent nod. It was a sign of trust, a signal that he was ready. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. The enemy tribe was encamped just beyond the ridge. They were unaware of the approaching attack, their warriors spread out lazily, resting before the day's hunt. Thomas could feel the adrenaline building in his veins as the Apache warriors began to tighten their grip on their weapons, the quiet anticipation almost unbearable. Then, in a flash, the quiet was broken by the sound of war cries that ripped through the morning air. The Apache warriors surged forward, arrows flying through the air, their targets the unprepared enemy warriors. Thomas spurred his horse into action, his rifle raised, ready to fight. The battle was brutal, fast, and chaotic. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he rode alongside the warriors, using the land to his advantage, the strategies he had learned coming into play. The rival tribe, caught off guard, quickly scrambled to defend themselves, but it was clear they were outmatched. Thomas's mind raced as he led the charge, his instincts guiding him. He saw one of the enemy warriors moving toward a group of Apache women and children, and without thinking, he charged at him, knocking him off his horse with a well-placed shot. The warrior fell to the ground with a thud, his rifle clattering beside him. Thomas's breath was heavy, his body slick with sweat, but he couldn't stop. The battle wasn't over yet. As the dust began to settle, Thomas looked around, scanning the battlefield for any signs of danger. The rival tribe was retreating, their warriors fleeing into the desert, leaving behind the wounded and the dead. The Apache warriors had won. The tribal leader rode up to Thomas, his face a mixture of pride and respect. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You led us to victory." Thomas's chest swelled with pride, but there was something else, too. A deep sense of relief washed over him. He had done it. He had proven himself, not just to the Apache people, but to himself as well. As the warriors celebrated their victory, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. Just days before, he had been a simple rancher, tending to his cattle and his land. Now, he was a leader of warriors, a man who had fought for something greater than himself. But even as the tribe celebrated, Thomas knew the journey was far from over. The enemy tribe had been defeated, but the struggle for survival in the harsh, unforgiving land was ongoing. The Apache people would always face challenges, and so would he. But for the first time in his life, Thomas felt like he truly belonged. He wasn't just a man of the land anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that would change the course of his life forever. As the days passed after the victory, life on the ranch began to settle back into a new rhythm. The Apache warriors had left, but their presence lingered in the air, in the small gifts they had left behind, and in the quiet respect they held for Thomas. The tribal leader, who had become a close ally and friend, had invited Thomas to join them in their daily rituals, but there was a part of him that still longed for the peaceful solitude of his ranch. He had changed, but the land that had always been his companion remained the same. One morning, as Thomas was working the fields, he noticed a group of Apache warriors riding towards his ranch again. His heart skipped a beat, but he steadied himself, knowing that he had earned their trust. As they approached, the same tribal leader rode at the front, his face a picture of resolve. "We have come to ask for your help again," the leader said, his voice serious. "There are new threats, more enemies who seek to destroy what we have built. We need you to lead us once more." Thomas was taken aback. He had just fought one battle, and now they wanted him to lead them into another? He was no warrior. But something in the leader's voice, in the steady gaze of the men and women around him, told him that this was his purpose now. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about securing a future for both the Apache and himself. "I'll do it," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The leader smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "We knew you would." Over the next few days, Thomas found himself once again preparing for battle. The Apache warriors trained, their skill with the bow and arrow as sharp as ever, while Thomas took on the role of strategist, learning their ways and studying the terrain. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something bigger, something that he could no longer escape. As the day of the battle drew near, Thomas found himself standing on the hill overlooking the land. The enemy tribe, a force as strong and ruthless as the Apache themselves, was known for their brutal tactics and cunning. They had been raiding the neighboring lands for months, and now they were headed towards the Apache territory. The warriors would need to be swift, precise, and prepared for anything. That night, as Thomas lay in his bed, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as a simple rancher, minding his own business, but now, he was leading a tribe into battle. The weight of the responsibility felt heavier than any saddle he had ever worn. He thought about the promise he had made to the Apache women, the kindness he had shown, and the reward he had received in return. His life had been forever changed, but now, it felt like the moment of truth had arrived. Would he be able to lead them to victory? Would he be the man they needed him to be? As dawn broke, the Apache warriors gathered, ready for battle. The air was thick with tension, but there was also a sense of unity, a bond that had been forged in the heat of battle and in the quiet moments of trust. Thomas stood at the front, his rifle in hand, his mind focused on the task ahead. The enemy would come soon, but the Apache warriors were ready. As the battle unfolded, Thomas fought alongside them, his instincts guiding him, his heart filled with purpose. He had been given a second chance, and now, he would not waste it. The battle was fierce, the sound of clashing weapons filling the air, but as the day wore on, it became clear that the Apache warriors had the upper hand. The rival tribe, outnumbered and outmatched, began to retreat. The Apache had won again. As the smoke cleared and the warriors began to regroup, Thomas stood in the center of the battlefield, his heart pounding in his chest. He had done it. They had done it. The Apache people had defended their land, and Thomas had led them to victory once more. The tribal leader approached him, his face filled with pride. "You have proven yourself, Thomas," he said, his voice filled with respect. "You are one of us now. You have earned our trust, our loyalty." Thomas smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He had found his place in the world, not as a simple rancher, but as a leader, a protector of those who needed him most. The journey had been long, but it had led him to this moment of victory, a victory that would echo through the history of the Apache people. The days following the victory were quiet, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something else was looming on the horizon. The Apache tribe had won another battle, but the peace that followed was a fleeting one. The land was still wild and untamed, and there were always threats waiting to appear from the shadows. Thomas had become something more than a simple rancher. He had earned the respect of the Apache people, but he knew that the role he had stepped into came with its own set of challenges. The land around his ranch had changed in his mind. It was no longer just a place of solitude and peace. It had become a battleground, a symbol of everything he had fought for. As he looked out over the plains one morning, the sun rising slowly on the horizon, he realized how much had shifted in his heart. The Apache had welcomed him into their world, but he wasn't sure how long he could stand in two worlds at once. He had always felt connected to the land, but now he felt torn. His life as a rancher seemed distant, as though it belonged to someone else. The tribe had become his family, but he was still uncertain about his place within it. The sense of loyalty he had always held for the land, the cattle, and the quiet of his life was being tested. In the distance, he could see a rider approaching. At first, Thomas thought it was just one of the Apache warriors making his rounds. But as the figure grew closer, Thomas recognized the man. It was the tribal leader, the man who had entrusted him with the safety of the tribe. The tribal leader rode up slowly, his face unreadable. He dismounted, walking toward Thomas with a purposeful stride. "We need to talk," the leader said, his voice low. Thomas felt a pang of nervousness. It had been some time since the leader had come to him directly. The leader motioned for Thomas to follow him, leading him toward the small gathering of warriors who were watching from a distance. They sat around a fire, their expressions serious. As Thomas approached, the leader began to speak. "There are rumors," he said, his eyes meeting Thomas's. "Another tribe is coming. They seek to take what we have built." Thomas felt a cold chill run through him. The peace they had fought so hard to protect was once again under threat. But this time, it wasn't just about defending their land. This was about survival. "What do you need from me?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The tribal leader nodded. "We need your help again. You've proven yourself once before. But this time, we will need more than just your leadership. We will need your heart." The leader's words hung heavy in the air, and Thomas realized just how much responsibility had been placed on him. The battle they were about to face was not just another skirmish. It was a fight for their very existence. The other tribe, a powerful force known for their cunning and brutality, was marching toward them. They weren't just coming for land. They were coming to take everything the Apache had fought for. As Thomas rode with the tribal leader to meet the other warriors, he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The responsibility of leading them was no longer just a role. It had become his life's mission. The warriors were already preparing for battle, sharpening their weapons, and getting ready for what would surely be a fight to the death. The feeling of dread was palpable, but so was the sense of unity among the Apache people. They were ready to defend their homes, to fight for their future. As the sun began to set, Thomas found himself standing beside the leader, looking out over the valley that had become the site of so many battles. He had never wanted to be a warrior, but now there was no turning back. The world around him had changed, and so had he. The rancher who had once dreamed of peaceful solitude was now the leader of a tribe, a man who would fight to the end for those he had come to call family. The night before the battle, Thomas sat by the fire, contemplating the fight ahead. He was no longer the man who worked alone in the fields. He was a man who had been called to protect something much bigger than himself. The war was coming, and there would be no more running. The only thing left to do was face it head-on. The next morning, the Apache warriors prepared for the final confrontation. Thomas rode at the front, his rifle ready, his heart steady. The enemy tribe would soon be upon them. This would be their last stand. And as the Apache warriors stood together, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was no longer alone. The tribe was his family, and he would protect them, no matter what it took. The battle had been long and brutal. Thomas could hear the sound of the Apache warriors' war cries echoing in the distance as the sun climbed higher into the sky. The enemy tribe had attacked with everything they had, but the Apache were fighting with a fire that burned deep within their souls. This wasn't just a battle for land anymore. It was a fight for their future, for the survival of their people. As Thomas rode through the chaos, his mind raced. He had never been a soldier, never been trained for war, but in the heat of battle, he had found something he never knew he had. The Apache had taught him more than just how to hold a rifle. They had taught him how to lead, how to protect, how to fight for something bigger than himself. The sound of hooves and the clash of weapons filled the air as Thomas and the Apache warriors pushed forward, driving the enemy back. The rival tribe was tough, but they were disorganized, caught off guard by the ferocity of the Apache defense. As the battle raged on, Thomas felt a sense of clarity wash over him. This was what he was meant to do. The fear and doubt he had felt in the days leading up to this moment had faded away, replaced by a fierce determination to protect the tribe he had come to call family. The Apache warriors fought with unmatched skill, their arrows striking with deadly precision, while Thomas led them through the battlefield with an unwavering focus. The rival tribe was being pushed back, retreating towards the hills as the Apache continued their relentless assault. Thomas could see the tribal leader at the front, his eyes filled with pride as he watched Thomas in action. The tribal leader had entrusted him with the responsibility of leading the warriors, and Thomas was proving that he was worthy of that trust. As the enemy forces finally began to scatter, Thomas rode ahead, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned in favor of the Apache. It was a victory, but Thomas knew that the true test was still to come. The rival tribe would not just disappear. They would regroup, and they would come for the Apache again. And Thomas would be ready. After the battle, the camp was quiet, the warriors tending to their wounds and preparing for what might come next. The tribal leader approached Thomas, his face a mixture of admiration and respect. "You did it," the tribal leader said, his voice low. "You led us to victory once again." Thomas nodded, though inside, he could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. As night fell, the warriors gathered around the fire, the warmth of the flames offering little comfort in the cold, still air. Thomas sat among them, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He had never asked for this role, never sought the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, but now, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The Apache were his people, and their fight was his fight. As the fire crackled and the stars filled the sky above, Thomas made a silent vow to himself. He would protect them, no matter the cost. He would lead them through whatever challenges lay ahead, even if it meant facing enemies greater than the one they had just defeated. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt a sense of belonging. He was no longer just a rancher or a stranger to the Apache people. He was one of them, bound by a common purpose and a shared history. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would fight for them, just as they had fought for him. The dawn of a new day would bring new challenges, but Thomas was ready. The war was far from over, but together, they would face it, one battle at a time. The days that followed the battle were filled with a heavy sense of change. The Apache tribe had won, but there was no celebration. There was no time for rest. Thomas could see the weariness in the faces of the warriors as they worked to rebuild their camp and fortify their defenses. The enemy tribe had retreated, but the victory felt like a temporary reprieve rather than a permanent solution. The land was still uncertain, and the peace that they had fought so hard for could slip through their fingers in the blink of an eye. As the tribe prepared for what might come next, Thomas found himself thinking about the future. He had been given a second chance, a place among the Apache, and a role that he never imagined for himself. He had proven himself as a leader, but now the true test lay ahead. There was no escaping the reality of their situation. The rival tribe had not been defeated entirely. They were simply regrouping, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And Thomas knew that he had to be ready for them. He had come to understand something important through his time with the Apache people. Their strength was not just in their numbers or their weapons, but in their unity. They fought not just for land, but for each other, for the future of their children, for their history. He was a part of that now, and it was a responsibility that weighed heavily on him. One evening, as Thomas stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley, the tribal leader approached him. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond that had grown stronger through the battles they had fought side by side. "We need to plan," the tribal leader said. "The rival tribe will come again. We need to be ready." Thomas nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. They had already secured their camp, but now it was time to take the fight to the enemy. They needed to strike before the rival tribe could gather their forces. "What do you need from me?" Thomas asked. The leader looked at him with a sharp gaze. "We need someone to lead us on the move," he said. "The time for defense is over. We need to attack." It was a heavy request, one that brought the full weight of their struggle into focus. The Apache had always fought to protect their land, but now they were being asked to take the fight to the enemy. Thomas had led them in battle before, but leading an offensive was something different. It was a risk, but it was also their only option. "I'll do it," Thomas said, his voice steady. The leader smiled, a nod of respect. "I knew you would." The next few days were filled with preparations. The warriors trained harder than ever, sharpening their weapons and perfecting their strategies. Thomas spent long hours with the tribal leaders, planning the route they would take and the timing of their attack. He had become more than just a leader of men. He had become a symbol of hope for the Apache people. As the days passed, Thomas began to feel the weight of his new role more than ever. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was a weight he had come to accept. The future of the tribe rested on his shoulders, and he was determined to protect it. Finally, the day came. The Apache warriors gathered in the early morning, the air crisp with anticipation. They were ready. As they rode out, the tension in the air was palpable. Thomas rode at the front once again, his rifle steady in his hands, his heart pounding with the knowledge of what was at stake. The journey to the rival tribe's camp was long, but the warriors moved quickly, their horses swift and sure. As they approached the enemy's camp, the first signs of danger appeared. The rival tribe had set up a series of traps along the path, but the Apache were prepared. They had anticipated the enemy's movements. It was time. The battle was fierce and fast. Arrows flew through the air, and the sound of gunfire echoed across the valley. But this time, Thomas was not leading from behind. He was in the thick of the fight, commanding his warriors with precision and courage. The rival tribe had underestimated the Apache's resolve. Their forces were scattered, their strategy in disarray. And as the Apache pressed forward, the enemy's defenses crumbled. By the end of the day, the rival tribe had been defeated. It was a decisive victory. As the dust settled, Thomas stood at the front of the battlefield, his heart still racing. The Apache had won. But even in the midst of victory, Thomas knew this wasn't the end. There would always be more battles, more challenges, more threats. But for now, they had secured their future. And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt that he had found his true place in the world. He was not just a rancher anymore. He was a leader, and the Apache were his people, his family. He would fight for them, protect them, and guide them through whatever came next. The sun set slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that had been fought for and won. The Apache people stood together, their faces marked with the dust of battle, but their spirits high. They had achieved a great victory, one that would be remembered for generations. But Thomas knew that their survival depended not just on one battle, but on the future they would now have to build together. He rode alongside the tribal leader, both of them silent as they surveyed the battlefield. It had been a long and difficult journey, and now it was time to look ahead. The battle was over, but the war for their survival was never truly finished. As the days passed, the Apache tribe began to rebuild. The warriors who had fought so fiercely now took up the work of restoring their homes and their lands. Thomas, now fully accepted as one of their own, worked alongside them. He had once been a rancher, a man who had known only the rhythms of cattle and crops. But now, he was part of something much bigger, a protector, a leader, a member of the Apache family. He found a deep sense of peace in the work, but there was still something tugging at him. The Apache had lived through hardships, their history filled with moments of loss and triumph. They had survived because they were a family, bound together by honor and respect. As Thomas sat by the fire one evening, watching the smoke rise into the night sky, he reflected on how far he had come. He had once been a man alone, isolated by choice, living in the quiet solitude of his ranch. Now, he was part of a community, a tribe that had taught him more than he ever thought he would learn. The sound of hooves broke his thoughts, and he turned to see the tribal leader approaching. The leader was an older man, his face weathered by years of struggle, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. "You have done well," the leader said, his voice filled with pride. "You have shown us what it means to fight for what matters. You are now one of us, not just by blood, but by spirit." Thomas nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had come a long way from the lonely rancher he had been. He had fought not only for the Apache, but for himself. And in doing so, he had found a new purpose, a new family, and a place where he truly belonged. As the leader rode off into the distance, Thomas felt a sense of contentment he had never known before. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led him here, to this moment of peace, where he knew he was home. The future was uncertain, as it always was in the wild, untamed lands of the West, but Thomas was no longer afraid. He had learned that home wasn't just a place. It was the people who stood beside you, the bonds you formed, and the courage you found within yourself. The Apache had given him everything he needed, and he would repay them with the same loyalty, honor, and courage. The sun dipped below the horizon, the night settling in, but Thomas knew that whatever came next, he was ready. He had found his place, his purpose, and his family. And for the first time in a long while, he was at peace.